Steve Rogers stood at the edge of the hospital rooftop, his shield resting against the concrete ledge. Below him, New York City buzzed with life, unaware that their greatest protector was questioning everything he had ever believed in. The morning sun cast long shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the deep lines that had formed over years of carrying burdens no man should bear alone. 3 days ago, everything had changed. The mission was supposed to be routine: stop a group of enhanced criminals from stealing experimental weapons from a SHIELD facility. Captain America had led the charge, as he always did, with unwavering confidence and absolute faith in his abilities. But this time, his calculations were wrong. This time, innocent people paid the price for his mistakes. The explosion had torn through the building's east wing, where a group of school children were on a field trip. Steve had managed to save most of them, his enhanced speed and strength allowing him to shield them from the worst of the blast. But not all of them. 7 children never made it home that night, and their faces haunted every moment of his waking hours. Maria Hill found him there, her footsteps deliberate as she approached. She had been searching for him since he disappeared from the debriefing 3 days ago. The usually composed deputy director of SHIELD looked tired, her professional demeanor softened by genuine concern. "The families don't blame you, Steve," she said quietly, standing beside him. "They understand that you saved dozens of lives. They know you did everything you could." Steve's jaw tightened. Everything I could wasn't enough. Those children trusted Captain America to protect them, and I failed them. Their parents sent them to school that morning, kissing them goodbye, never imagining it would be the last time. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotional wall he had built around himself. Hill watched him carefully. She had seen Steve face impossible odds, watched him rally entire armies with nothing but his conviction and courage. But she had never seen him like this, broken, questioning the very foundation of who he was. The weight of the shield had finally become too much to bear. "You can't save everyone, Steve. No one expects you to be perfect." "I expect it," he replied sharply, turning to face her. "Every time I put on this uniform, every time I pick up this shield, I make a promise. To America, to the world, to every person who looks up at the sky hoping I'll be there when they need me most. I broke that promise." The wind picked up, rustling through Hill's dark hair. She could see the internal battle raging within him, the same battle that had defined Steve Rogers long before he became Captain America. The boy from Brooklyn who always stood up to bullies, who never backed down from a fight, who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders because he believed it was his responsibility to do so. "The Steve Rogers I know doesn't give up," she said firmly. "He doesn't run from responsibility or hide from his failures. He learns from them and becomes stronger." Steve picked up his shield, running his fingers along its vibranium surface. The metal was cool to the touch, unmarked despite countless battles. It was supposed to be unbreakable, just like the man who wielded it. But Steve felt anything but unbreakable now. "Maybe that's a problem," he whispered. "Maybe I've been carrying this shield for so long that I've forgotten the difference between Steve Rogers and Captain America. Maybe I've lost sight of what really matters." Hill stepped closer, her voice gentle but insistent. "What matters is that you're still here, still fighting. Those 7 children, their sacrifice means something because you've made sure it does. You've dedicated your life to preventing tragedies like this from happening again." Steve closed his eyes, remembering the faces of the children he couldn't save. Emma Martinez, age 8, who wanted to be an astronaut. David Chen, age 9, who collected comic books about superheroes. Sarah Williams, age 7, who had smiled at him just moments before the explosion. Each name was burned into his memory, a constant reminder of his greatest failure. "I used to believe that being Captain America meant never showing weakness, never admitting defeat," he said, opening his eyes to meet Hill's gaze. "But standing here now, I realize that the strongest thing I can do is acknowledge that I'm human, that I make mistakes. That sometimes, despite all my strength and training and good intentions, people still die." The city continued its relentless pace below them, but on that rooftop, time seemed suspended. Steve Rogers was at a crossroads, forced to confront the impossible standards he had set for himself and the crushing responsibility he had willingly accepted when he first picked up the shield. As the sun climbed high in the sky, Steve made a decision that would change everything. He would not abandon his post or retire the shield, but he would face the truth about what it meant to be a hero in a world where victory often came at an unbearable cost. The weight of the shield would remain, but he would learn to carry it differently. The abandoned warehouse in Queens held secrets that Steve Rogers wished he could leave buried. As he pushed open the rusted metal door, memories flooded back with startling clarity. This was where it all began, where a young soldier named James Buchanan Barnes had died in his arms over 70 years ago, and where the Winter Soldier had been born. Nick Fury stood in the shadows, his single eye reflecting the dim light filtering through broken windows. "You've been avoiding my calls, Rogers." Steve stepped inside, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. The space was exactly as he remembered it. Empty, cold, haunting. "I needed time to think. After what happened with those children, I can't just pretend everything is fine." "Nobody's asking you to pretend," Fury replied, moving into the light. His leather coat rustled as he walked, and Steve noticed the director looked older than usual, worn down by years of carrying secrets and making impossible decisions. But running away isn't going to bring them back. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Bucky Barnes emerged from the darkness, his metal arm gleaming despite the warehouse's dim lighting. The two old friends regarded each other with a mixture of affection and unspoken pain. Their reunion after decades apart had been joyful, but it was complicated by the terrible things Bucky had been forced to do as a Winter Soldier. "Steve," Bucky said simply, his voice carrying the weight of shared history. "Maria told me what happened. I came as soon as I could." The three men stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The warehouse seemed to pulse with the ghosts of past missions, past failures, past losses that had shaped them all into the people they were today. Fury broke the silence first. "There's something you both need to know. The attack on the SHIELD facility wasn't random. We've been tracking a new organization called the Syndicate, former intelligence operatives from various countries who've gone rogue. They've been targeting facilities with advanced technology, but this was different." Steve's attention snapped to the director. "Different how?" "They knew you would be there. They knew about the school group. This wasn't a heist gone wrong, Steve. It was a trap designed specifically for Captain America." Fury's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Bucky's expression darkened. "They used those kids as bait." The revelation hit Steve like a physical blow. The children hadn't died because of his mistakes. They had died because someone had deliberately put them in harm's way to hurt him. The guilt he had been carrying transformed into something far more dangerous: rage. "Who's leading the syndicate?" Steve asked, his voice deadly quiet. Fury handed him a tablet displaying surveillance photos. "Dr. Heinrich Zemo, son of Baron Zemo. He blames you for his father's death and has spent the last 5 years planning this revenge. But Steve, this is exactly what he wants, for you to come after him driven by anger and guilt." Steve studied the images of a man who looked remarkably similar to his father, the same cold eyes, the same calculating expression. Heinrich Zemo had inherited more than just his father's appearance. He had inherited his hatred and his brilliant tactical mind. "It's not wrong to blame me," Steve said quietly. "I did kill his father." Baron Zemo was a Nazi war criminal who tried to destroy half of London. Bucky interjected firmly. "You stopped him from murdering thousands of innocent people. That's what heroes do, Steve. They make the hard choices." Steve handed the tablet back to Fury, his mind racing. "Where is he now?" "That's the problem. Zemo's been recruiting enhanced individuals from around the world, promising them revenge against the system that created people like you and me. He's building an army, and according to our intelligence, he's planning something big for the anniversary of his father's death." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller, more claustrophobic. Steve could feel the walls closing in as the full scope of Zemo's plan became clear. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about destroying everything Captain America represented, everything he had fought to protect. "How long do we have?" Steve asked. 2 weeks, Fury replied grimly. "But Steve, you need to understand something. Zemo studied you for years. He knows how you think, how you fight, how you make decisions under pressure. He's designed every aspect of his plan to exploit your weaknesses." Bucky placed a hand on Steve's shoulder. "That's why you won't be going in alone. We do this together, just like the old days. Steve looked at his oldest friend, seeing both the young sergeant who had followed him into battle and the hardened warrior who had survived decades of brainwashing and manipulation. Bucky had found his way back from the darkness, had reclaimed his identity and his humanity despite everything that had been taken from him. The old days were different, Steve said softly. We were different. Simpler, maybe. We knew who the enemy was and what we were fighting for. The enemy is the same as it's always been, Bucky replied. People who use fear and hatred to justify hurting innocent people. And what we're fighting for hasn't changed either. The right of good people to live their lives without fear. Fury nodded in agreement. Zemo's counting on you being too paralyzed by guilt to act effectively. He wants you to see those children's faces every time you make a decision. But you can't let their memory become a weakness, Steve. Let it become a strength. As the three men prepared to leave the warehouse, Steve took one last look around the empty space. This was where his journey as Captain America had truly begun, where he had learned that being a hero meant accepting the consequences of your actions, even when those consequences were almost too heavy to bear. The shadows of the past would always follow him, but Steve Rogers was ready to step back into the light. Zemo wanted a war, and Captain America would give him one, but it would be fought on Steve's terms, with honor and purpose, for the memory of 7 children who deserved justice. The SHIELD medical facility buzzed with quiet activity as Steve Rogers walked through the children's wing. He had come here every day for the past week, not as Captain America, but as Steve Rogers, a man trying to understand the full weight of his actions and their consequences. The surviving children from the field trip were recovering, but their emotional wounds ran deeper than their physical ones. Dr. Sarah Chen, the facility's chief psychologist, met him at the entrance to the ward. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, the kind of person who dedicated her life to healing rather than fighting. Steve found her perspective both challenging and necessary. "How are they today?" he asked, his voice soft with concern. "Better," she replied, walking beside him down the corridor lined with colorful drawings and get-well cards. Children are remarkably resilient, but they are also incredibly perceptive. They know something terrible happened, and they know adults are upset about it. They stopped outside a room where 8-year-old Marcus Thompson sat by the window, staring out at the city skyline. His left arm was still in a cast from the explosion, but his eyes held a sadness that no child should ever experience. Steve had learned that Marcus had been best friends with Emma Martinez, one of the children who didn't survive. "He has been asking about you," Dr. Chen said quietly. "He wants to know why Captain America couldn't save everyone." The question hit Steve like a punch to the gut. It was the same question he had been asking himself every night, the same impossible riddle that had no satisfactory answer. How do you explain to a child that even superheroes have limitations? "Can I talk to him?" Steve asked. Dr. Chen nodded and gently knocked on the door frame. Marcus toned, and his eyes widened when he saw Steve. Unlike most children who met Captain America, Marcus didn't smile or get excited. Instead, he studied Steve with the serious expression of someone much older. "Hi, Marcus," Steve said, entering the room and taking a seat across from the boy. "How are you feeling today?" "My arm doesn't hurt anymore," Marcus replied, his voice small and uncertain. "But I keep thinking about Emma. She was supposed to come to my birthday party next week." Steve felt his throat tighten. Emma Martinez had been Marcus's age, full of life and dreams and endless curiosity about the world around her. She had asked Steve dozens of questions during their brief meeting at the facility, about his shield, about being a soldier, about whether superheroes ever got scared. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry I couldn't save her." The boy looked directly at Steve with startling intensity. "My mom says heroes can't save everyone. She says you saved me and lots of other kids. But I don't understand why some people get saved and some don't." It was perhaps the most profound question Steve had ever been asked, cutting straight to the heart of every moral dilemma he had faced as Captain America. How do you choose who lives and who dies? How do you live with the knowledge that your decisions determine someone's fate? "I don't understand it either," Steve admitted, his honesty surprising even himself. "I wish I could save everyone, Marcus. I wish I was strong enough and fast enough and smart enough to make sure no one ever gets hurt. But I'm not. I'm just a man who tries his best and sometimes fails." Marcus nodded slowly, processing this revelation. Emma liked you. She said you had kind eyes, not scary eyes like some superheroes in movies. Steve smiled sadly. She was a very special girl. She asked me if I ever got scared, and I told her that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Are you scared now? Marcus asked. The question caught Steve off guard. He looked at this brave little boy who had survived a traumatic experience and was still trying to make sense of the world, and he realized that honesty was the only gift he could offer. Yes, Steve said quietly. I'm scared that I'll make another mistake. I'm scared that my best won't be good enough. I'm scared that people like you will get hurt because of choices I make. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, turning back to look out the window. My dad is a fireman. He told me that being scared is okay, but giving up isn't. He said that's what makes someone a hero, not giving up even when things are really hard. The wisdom of the child's words resonated deeply within Steve. Here was an 8-year-old boy who had lost his best friend and nearly lost his own life, yet he was offering comfort and perspective to Captain America himself. It was a reminder that heroism came in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest courage was displayed by ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Dr. Chen appeared in the doorway, signaling that visiting time was ending. As Steve prepared to leave, Marcus called out to him, Captain America. Yes, Marcus. Emma would want you to keep trying. She believed in heroes, and she believed in you. Steve felt tears threatening to spill from his eyes. He knelt down beside Marcus's chair and gently placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Thank you, Marcus. You've taught me something very important today. What's that? That being a hero isn't about being perfect. It's about caring enough to keep trying, even when it hurts. As Steve left the medical facility, he carried with him a new understanding of his role as Captain America. The children who had been lost would always be a part of his story, a reminder of the stakes involved in every decision he made. But the children who had survived, brave, resilient kids like Marcus Thompson, were proof that hope could endure even in the darkest circumstances. The shield felt different as he picked it up, not lighter but somehow more purposeful. Steve Rogers was ready to face Heinrich Zemo, not as a man consumed by guilt, but as a hero who understood that true strength came from accepting your failures and using them to become better. The heart of a hero wasn't made of vibranium. It was made of compassion, determination, and the unwavering belief that every life was worth fighting for. The abandoned subway tunnel beneath Brooklyn stretched endlessly into darkness, its walls echoing with the drip of water and the distant rumble of trains on active lines above. Steve Rogers moved through the shadows with practiced silence, his shield secured on his back as he tracked the Syndicate's movements through the underground maze. Intelligence indicated that Heinrich Zemo had established his base of operations somewhere in this forgotten network of tunnels, using the city's own infrastructure against itself. Bucky Barnes flanked him from the Eastern Passage, their communication limited to hand signals and the intuitive understanding that came from decades of partnership. The Winter Soldier's enhanced abilities made him nearly invisible in the darkness, a ghost seeking redemption through the pursuit of justice. 3 weeks had passed since the attack on the SHIELD facility, and Zemo's syndicate had grown bolder with each passing day. They had struck targets across the globe, a research facility in Geneva, a military compound in Tokyo, a government building in London. Each attack was precisely calculated to inflict maximum damage while avoiding direct confrontation with major superhero teams. Zemo was playing a longer game, building towards something catastrophic. Steve's earpiece crackled with Fury's voice. Satellite thermal imaging shows approximately 30 heat signatures in the central chamber, 200 meters ahead of your position. Zemo's definitely there. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that had once served as a maintenance hub for the old subway system. Banks of stolen technology hummed with electricity, casting an eerie blue glow across the concrete walls. Heinrich Zemo stood at the center of it all, older and more hardened than his father, but possessing the same calculating intelligence that had made Baron Zemo such a dangerous enemy. Captain America, Zemo called out without turning around, his accent carrying traces of his Eastern European heritage. Right on schedule. You always were predictably heroic. Steve stepped into the chamber, shield at the ready. Around him, Enhanced operatives emerged from concealment, men and women from various nations who had been recruited by Zemo's promise of revenge against the system that had created super soldiers and then abandoned them. It ends here. Zemo, no more innocent people have to die for your father's sins. Zemo finally turned, revealing a face marked by years of hatred and careful planning. My father's sins? My father was a patriot who fought against American imperialism. You murdered him in cold blood and called it justice. Your father was a Nazi who tried to commit genocide, Steve replied firmly. I stopped him from killing thousands of innocent people. Innocent? Zemo laughed bitterly. Like those children at the SHIELD facility? Tell me, Captain, how does it feel to know that your presence in that building sealed their fate? How does it feel to know that they died because Heinrich Zemo wanted to hurt Steve Rogers? The psychological attack was expertly crafted, designed to paralyze Steve with guilt and self-doubt. But the conversations with Marcus Thompson and the other survivors had changed something fundamental in Steve's approach to heroism. He no longer carried the weight of perfection on his shoulders. Their deaths were a tragedy, Steve said quietly, but they died because you chose to use them as weapons against me. That choice, that evil, belongs to you alone. Zemo's eyes flashed with surprise. He had expected the guilt-ridden, emotionally compromised Captain America that his intelligence reports had described. Instead, he faced a man who had found peace with his limitations and strength in his humanity. No matter, Zemo said, pressing a button on a device in his hand. The real purpose of our encounter was never about direct confrontation. While you've been playing hero in the tunnels, my team has been implementing the final phase of our operation. On screens around the chamber, live feed showed syndicate operatives at key infrastructure points throughout New York City, power plants, water treatment facilities, communication hubs, and transportation centers. Each location was rigged with explosives that would cripple the city's ability to function. You have 30 minutes to choose, Captain America. Save the city's infrastructure and preserve the comfortable lives of millions, or stop me from completing my father's work, a device that will release a toxin into the atmosphere, ensuring that no more super soldiers will ever be created. You cannot do both. Steve's mind raced through the implications. The infrastructure attacks would cause chaos and potentially thousands of casualties, but they were ultimately repairable. Zemo's toxin, however, could prevent future generations from ever receiving the super soldier serum or similar enhancements. It would end the age of enhanced human forever. Bucky's voice crackled through the earpiece. Steve, I can handle the toxin device. You coordinate the response to the infrastructure attacks. No, Steve replied immediately. The device requires someone with detailed knowledge of biochemistry to safely disarm it. That's not either of us. Zemo smiled coldly. The beauty of an impossible choice, Captain. This is what real heroism looks like, not the sanitized version you've been selling to the world, but the brutal reality of having to choose who lives and who dies based on incomplete information and insufficient time. Steve activated his communication system, connecting to SHIELD headquarters. Fury, we need immediate deployment of all available assets. Zemo has simultaneous attacks planned across the city's infrastructure. I'm transmitting the locations now. Steve, Fury's voice was grim. We don't have the manpower to hit all those targets simultaneously. Then we make the hard choice, Steve replied. We prioritize based on potential casualties and critical need. The power plants and hospitals first, then transportation and communication. As SHIELD teams scrambled to respond to the crisis, Steve turned his attention back to Zemo. The toxin device was nearly complete, its complex mechanism requiring precise timing to activate properly. But Steve had noticed something that Zemo had missed. The device's power source was connected to the same network that supplied the chamber's lighting and computer systems. Bucky, on my signal, cut the main power line to this section. Steve, that'll kill the lights and disable our communication. It'll also prevent Zemo from completing his device remotely. Trust me. Steve raised his shield, preparing for the chaos that would follow. Do it. The chamber plunged into darkness as Bucky severed the power line. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in a red glow that made the scene look like something from a nightmare. Zemo's enhanced operatives moved to attack, But Steve was already in motion, his shield singing through the air as it deflected gunfire and struck targets with precise force. The battle that followed was brutal and desperate, fought in confined spaces against enemies who had nothing left to lose. But Steve Rogers had found something in the darkness of his own doubt, not the false confidence of perfection, but the true strength that came from accepting responsibility while refusing to be paralyzed by it. As dawn broke over New York City, emergency responders worked to repair the damage to the city's infrastructure. The attacks had been partially successful, causing blackouts and disruption that would take days to fully resolve. But the casualties were minimal, thanks to coordinated efforts and the heroic actions of ordinary people who stepped up in crisis. Heinrich Zemo was in custody, his toxin device destroyed beyond repair. The price of justice had been paid not in perfect victory, but in the messy, complicated reality of doing the best you could with the choices available. 6 months after the Syndicate crisis, Steve Rogers stood before the newly dedicated memorial in Central Park. 7 small bronze plaques bore the names of the children who had lost their lives, surrounded by a garden that would bloom each spring with flowers chosen by their families. The memorial was simple but profound, a reminder that heroism was measured not just in victories, but in how we honor those we could not save. Marcus Thompson stood beside him, his cast long gone and his smile returned, though tempered by a wisdom that no 8-year-old should possess. The boy had asked to be present for the memorial's dedication, and his mother had agreed, understanding that this was part of his healing process. "Do you think they would like it?" Marcus asked, looking up at Steve with those same serious eyes that had challenged Captain America to confront his own humanity. "I think Emma would love the flowers," Steve replied softly. "And David would be excited about the comic book donation box we're installing next week." The ceremony had drawn hundreds of people, families of the victims, survivors of the attack, SLD personnel, and ordinary citizens who had been touched by the story of loss and resilience. Mayor Richard spoke about the courage of children and the responsibility of adults to protect innocence. Dr. Chen discussed the importance of processing trauma and finding meaning in tragedy. When it came time for Steve to speak, he approached the podium not as Captain America, but as Steve Rogers, a man who had learned that true strength came from vulnerability and authentic humanity. "We gather today not to glorify loss, but to celebrate lives that, though brief, change us forever," he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Emma, David, Sarah, Michael, Lisa, Carlos, and James taught us that heroism isn't about being invulnerable or infallible. They showed us that real courage is found in curiosity, in kindness, in the simple act of trusting that tomorrow will be better than today. He paused, looking out at the faces before him. Parents holding their children a little closer, teachers thinking about the students they had lost, heroes questioning their own methods and motivations. "I have spent my life trying to be worthy of the shield I carry, believing that worthiness meant never failing, never showing weakness, never admitting that I am, at my core, simply human." These 7 children, in their final moments, taught me something I had forgotten. They didn't need Captain America to be perfect. They needed him to care enough to keep trying, even when trying wasn't enough. In the crowd, Bucky Barnes stood with other members of the extended SHLD family, watching his oldest friend transform grief into purpose. The Winter Soldier had found his own redemption through Steve's example, learning that the past didn't have to define the future if you were willing to fight for something better. Nick Fury observed from periphery, as was his way. The director had seen many heroes rise and fall over his long career, but few had demonstrated the kind of growth that Steve Rogers had shown in recent months. The crisis with Zemo had revealed something important about Captain America. He was most dangerous when he embraces humanity rather than trying to transcend it. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the sun began to set behind the Manhattan skyline, Steve found himself alone with the memorial. The bronze plaques gleamed in the fading light, each name a story cut short, a future that would never unfold. Maria Hill approached, her footsteps soft on the garden path. "The president wants to award you the Medal of Honor for stopping Zemo's operation." Steve shook his head. "The real heroes are the first responders who kept people safe during the infrastructure attacks, the doctors and nurses who saved lives, the teachers who shielded their students with their own bodies, and the man who learned to forgive himself enough to keep fighting," Hill added quietly. They stood in comfortable silence, watching as maintenance workers began installing soft lighting that would illuminate the memorial each evening. This place would become a gathering point for those who needed to remember that loss and hope could coexist, that healing was possible even in the aftermath of tragedy. Steve's phone buzzed with an alert. A hostage situation downtown. Armed suspects. Civilians in danger. Captain America was needed. But as he prepared to answer the call, Steve felt different than he had 6 months ago. The weight of the shield remained, but it was balanced now by the understanding that heroism wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up again and again, even when the odds were impossible and the stakes were heartbreaking. "Go," Hill said, recognizing the look in his eyes. "The city needs Captain America." "No," Steve replied, picking up his shield and securing it to his back. "The city needs someone who understands that every life matters, that every choice has consequences, and that true victory sometimes looks like saving who you can and honoring who you couldn't." As he swung into action, moving through the city with renewed purpose, Steve Rogers carried with him the lessons learned in the hardest months of his life. The shield on his back bore the weight not just of vibranium, but of 7 names that would forever remind him why the fight was worth continuing. In the growing darkness of evening, the memorial's lights flickered on, casting a gentle glow across the garden where flowers would bloom each spring in memory of children who had believed in heroes. Their trust had not been misplaced. They had shaped Captain America into something greater than a symbol of perfection. They had made him human. The tears of Valor that had nearly broken Steve Rogers had ultimately forged him into the hero the world truly needed, not a god among mortals, but a man among men, carrying hope forward one choice, one day, one saved life at a time. In learning to forgive himself, he had discovered that redemption's light was bright enough to illuminate even the darkest paths ahead.